watched a talk, and I think it was at this exponential medicine conference or something. And the guy, I don't know his name, he was talking about psilocybin mushrooms and how they're doing studies that it really helps people if they're terminally ill at the end of their life to deal with the anxiety of dying. And he was hoping, and other people are hoping, that it might be rescheduled for use in that context for people who are really anxious about dying. And he said there's an infinite wisdom within us, within consciousness, that's unlocked by psilocybin. And I think it can be unlocked by many things, not just psilocybin. And I think that's one of the things that gets unlocked when a person goes into MAP consciousness or manic consciousness, is it's like going into this state of infinite wisdom. And he also said these are meaning-making compounds, and I thought that was interesting because I remember talking about the meaning-making and how that's important. I think MAP consciousness and mania is a state of making other meanings and assigning other values to reality than the ones that our programmed ego would have us assign. So again, I'm just taking what he said and transferring that over to the experience of MAP consciousness, which in my case has happened organically. I didn't have any kind of substance-induced mania or psychosis. The point is that our own body can make these biomolecules endogenously, and will do so if there's some kind of need for that. So for some reason, my consciousness thought, it's time to go into MAP consciousness, it's time to go into mania, for whatever reason. And like Sean Blackwell said, it's a healing process. Even psychosis is a healing process. It could even be helping to heal that one doesn't want to participate in this insane society. And when I was listening to this talk, I was thinking about how psychosis could even be partly for us to experience death so we're not afraid of death. I've experienced psychosis and felt like I've died numerous times. I would say 3 times pretty strongly, and then other times for sure too. And the guy also said they take the medicine once and it's a transformative experience. It recalibrates how they die. For one, it's a transformative experience. So is MAP consciousness. And that can happen when the inner medicine of the body kicks in. It's the inner wisdom, it's the inner shaman that kicks in and turns on these processes, that turns on these inner molecules in order to heal the psyche or whatever it needs to heal. It's an inner death while living, and we're judging that death as well, and we're not handling that death process well either. It's a death of the ego, or at least elements of it. Even Eckhart Tolle says to die before you die and realize there's no death. Well, this is part of what MAP consciousness is, dying before you die. And the other interesting statement is it recalibrates how they die. Well, I think MAP consciousness recalibrates how we live. At least it's supposed to. And I've even used that word, recalibrate. Yet, after our recalibration, when we're at our weakest point, because it's sort of drained us of everything we know to be true, we're given the story that we're mentally ill and defective. When, if we knew anything about neuroplasticity, we would know that's not true. It's a matter of destructing all those circuits that are not serving us or humanity anymore, and then growing again as something new. Just like a forest fire burns the whole forest down, well then a new growth forest, and it's even stronger because it's of the seeds that survive the fire. So whatever is left after the fire of mania and psychosis is what we're supposed to grow from. And it's usually channeled into this process they call recovery, which is you're mentally ill and you're defective, and you're going to be stigmatized because we've given you this, and you're going to have to walk around saying, I'm mentally ill and defective, but don't stigmatize me, because that's what we say that you should say and how you should interpret this. It's a rebirth. It's a rediscovery and recreation process. And psychosis and mania is like this fire that burns everything that we don't need anymore. And then it's up to us to move into that which is indestructible, because it can only destroy those parts of us which are not real. And part of the recalibration is to open our hearts. And he mentioned in the video something called the noetic quality, which is encountering ultimate reality. There's definitely a noetic quality in mania and psychosis. And when we experience that ultimate reality, sometimes we are sounding like we're confused and things, because it's a state full of awe and wonder. And sometimes we can only use metaphors to try and put it into words. And he talked about set and setting for the people he administered the psilocybin to and how important it is. Well, for people in map consciousness, their set and setting often is their same old mundane life, or the structure of society, which is not structured for somebody to be in map consciousness for long periods of time without getting freaked out. And then not only that, people are taken to scary settings such as psych hospitals. And then, since they're so vulnerable and sensitive in consciousness, they can react to that, and then they look like they're mentally ill or something, when really they're afraid because they should be. And I was thinking about how people might be allowed to have these states of consciousness, to go into altered states of consciousness at the end of their life. They're not now, but maybe if they change the laws, people will be able to take that from a doctor at the end of life in order to feel comfortable with dying. Yet it's not okay to have map consciousness any other way at any other point in time. It's not allowed. Part of the trouble with psychosis is it's just not allowed. And he gave some examples of what people were saying after they experienced having the psilocybin mushroom experience. And people are saying, we're all one, and all these beautiful things. And I'm thinking, wouldn't that be good to know at the beginning of life? Wouldn't that be a good experience to give people when they're just hitting puberty? Wouldn't that create a different world? Yet, since these people are dying, we're going to let them have this altered state of consciousness in a safe and controlled environment, which in a lot of shamanic cultures is part of rites of passage, where people are given some kind of teacher plant or something in order for people to have that experience to inform the rest of their life, not to inform the end of their life. And he was saying consciousness is made out of love and all this lovely stuff, and I'm thinking to myself, these are the things people need to know before they enter into adulthood, not just before they go to the other side. And I think that's part of what map consciousness is trying to do, is creating the same experience of a psilocybin mushroom endogenously. We can do that spontaneously. We can't by our own will, but by the will of something else, which is one of the reasons why it feels so mystical and otherworldly, is because we don't necessarily always consciously intend for that to happen. So even though we have this illusion of control and this illusion of free will, we only do to a very limited extent. And he talked about seeing ultimate reality and how love is the answer. And it's just silly to me, because if that's really what that does, people should be given that in high school, not when they're dying. It seems so obvious that the only way it would be allowed this way is because people are going to die. And it's like mercy on these people who have maybe sold their life into some other crap that they didn't even want to do because they didn't know that love was the answer from the beginning, because it's programmed out of us. So it's a good start that people might be allowed to die in peace. After not living in peace. Mania is the mind exercising the brain. Consciousness can exercise the brain. The level of consciousness exercises the brain. And it seems that consciousness wants us to get used to these extreme changes in consciousness. And people who are able to do that will actually have an advantage. Something beyond us is changing our consciousness. Part of this is the perspective taking. That's part of how the mind uses the brain to create itself. We have to be able to see from all the infinite perspectives of the total mind. That's our job as human beings. We're probably the only creature that can do that. The mind consciousness is changing our brains. And we think that the planet will be destroyed, but I think what will actually be destroyed first is our own brain. Because there's a certain percentage of people right now with their brains not working properly. The brain is not really being used properly, it's being wasted. I think wise brains will last. Dr. Albert Vitilido said, nature selects for wisdom. And if map consciousness is a state of wisdom, of learning, I feel that nature's going to select for brains that have the whole spectrum of wisdom, the whole spectrum of consciousness. And other brains will be deteriorating, whereas they can't even really function anymore. And the wisdom is all those natural, innate human dimensions. Those inner human dimensions are what feed the brain, really. Cooperation, laughter, oxytocin. Our brains are starved of the nutrients of relationship and unconditional love, which are oxytocin type experiences. I just looked up oxytocin and it looks like it might be increased by vitamin C. I just looked up oxytocin and it looks like it might be increased by vitamin C. I was thinking about that other TED Talk I watched, which was Flex Your Cortex, and how one of her secrets was thinking big. And it occurred to me that most people don't even know how to think big, because we're so busy thinking about the past, or we're so busy thinking about our knowledge or what we've memorized or stuff like that, so we don't actually know how to think big. And I was thinking that my self-dialogue process is sort of like thinking big. They're not really big thoughts, but they're just a lot of thoughts. And there are a lot of new thoughts and different thoughts, and some overlap, and in that way I think it's creating new brain cells in my brain, and probably more blood flow to my brain as well. But it just sort of occurred to me that I don't even know if people know how to use their brains in this way or in a similar way. People might be able to watch a TED Talk or something and nod their head and smile, but can they actually interpret it? Can they actually extrapolate it? Can they actually find the meaning and and what's implicit in what's being said, and relate that to other areas, or can they just absorb it and try to memorize it and then regurgitate it later? And I feel like what she's talking about, thinking big, doesn't mean regurgitating what other people said, because those are old memories, or even memorizing something in general causes, I would think, scar tissue in the brain, because we're not really meant to memorize things. Because if our brains are perceiving and seeing and thinking in the moment, then our brains are doing its job, because it's responding to the moment. And if we adequately respond to the moment, we don't really have to think about something else. And if we need some kind of other information, we'll be able to find it, or it will just appear in our consciousness without having to actually think about it or remember it. It'll just be there, just sort of like aha. Our brains are supposed to work more like aha and eureka all day long, not I am this and blah 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 blah. So yeah, part of this, me talking to myself, is the thinking big, and maybe other people might see that this is about thinking for oneself and growing one's own brain. Instead of being thinked by old thinking. I feel like saying I think, if it comes from memory, if it comes from the past, if it comes from a personal psychological thought, should be more like I thunked. I thunked. I thunked. And that's more equating what's really going on in somebody's head, which is like old scar tissue, as opposed to actual using one's brain to see. So I really hope that people might be able to start seeing and thinking, not sawing what I saw yesterday or 10 years ago and replaying that in one's consciousness, which keeps one in the level of consciousness of those thoughts, and is a prison. When you hyperlearn in this way, you don't need memory. If you need memory, it will be there, but you don't have to actually be using any of your energy to find it. If your mind screen isn't full of your own past thoughts and thinking about yourself, that's where those memories that you need, or information, or ideas will appear not as a linear associative process, but just likely holographically. And it is likely holographic because, as they say, every bit of information in the entire universe is available at every point in the universe. So if our brain, our mind screen, isn't clogged up with anything, holographically, in that moment, as the moment requires, the light of your awareness will access that, because you can be aware of it, because you're clear. And when you're always remembering things, it's in the way of that clarity. And the hyper-learning state without memory is intrinsically motivating, without having to think about what is motivating, because that's a memory. So even one's motivation has to be negated. And I feel that with map consciousness, it takes a while to grow into our expanded awareness, and to be able to be aware without falling into the trap of getting used by some of the things that we become aware of. takes time to adapt. Like I mentioned before, it's like being blind and then all of a sudden having surgery to restore eyesight. We think we see the world, but we don't. We just see our own past. And it's interesting because we see our own personal past, and in map consciousness, a lot of times we get access to the past of the collective of humanity. And it's almost like the past of the collective of humanity led up to the point where we're born, and then we see in that same way and we continue those perceptions. So us being born as a perceptual apparatus in the universe was preceded by all the collective perceptions up until that point. So it makes sense that in map consciousness we have to go through that entire spectrum of all of the perceptions of humanity in order to rid ourselves of those perceptions, because we can't really rid ourselves of something that we're not aware of. So we become aware of all of that so we can say goodbye to it and not have it as part of our perceptual apparatus. I feel like map consciousness is neuroplasticity. It is learning. It's the brain learning about the mind. And then a person comes back from that state and everything is done to try to stop it. Whereas everywhere else in science and brain science, they're trying to study neuroplasticity. When it comes to people who go through these neuroplastic extreme experiences, these extreme experiences of neuroplasticity, they're given meds to stop it from happening again. And it's never equated to neuroplasticity. Oh, let's research neuroplasticity and for people recovering from spinal injury, or for people recovering from some kind of happening at birth, or stroke. But people diagnosed with mental illness, so that has nothing to do with neuroplasticity. We don't want to think about that because that's the brain turning on hyper neuroplasticity for itself by itself without the need of science or anything. So we don't want that, because you can't patent the brain turning on its own neuroplasticity. So second, brain growth and pruning. And the brain is trying to outgrow the society. It's trying to operate at higher levels of consciousness in order to create a different society. The brain is trying to wake itself up and is trying to learn how to celebrate and be joyous for no reason, because reasons are given to us by society. Reasons are programmed, and so is motivation. Motivation is like focus. They tell us what to be motivated by and for, and to focus on. And if we're not motivated by those things, then something must be wrong with us. Just means we weren't able to accept that programming.